want to welcome everyone to the channel. If this is your first time or your 100th, why don't you like the video, subscribe. We'd love to see you back. We're talking about tips and tricks today. A lot of people have asked a lot of questions, and so I thought, hey, it's Tuesday, let's do some tips and tricks. And a lot of this all stemmed from my latest video on Lake St. Clair. Obviously, I was using a Ned Rig, but a lot of people were asking me, well, what is the Ned Rig? What kind of baits do you use? How do you use it? What are your preferences? And so we're going to take a few minutes just to kind of walk through that today. So let's get kicked off. All right, so let's start with the basics, the jig head. Z-Man has definitely put Ned rigging back on the map. Originally it was jig worming, just with a slightly bigger worm. Ned rigging just uses a smaller jig head. And people are using cutoff sized Cincos and things like that. And so for me, I like to use a lighter weight jig. Obviously, it kind of tends towards the finesse side of things. This is my setup. I've got a small box here that I use. It's a bunch of different jig heads. You can kind of see I've got a lot of stuff written down on the thing. And first and foremost, just stay organized. If you've got a little baggie of the Z-Mans, and I've got a bunch of them, make sure you grab a marker. I always carry one with me. And mark down what you got. So here I've got 1/6 ounce, because once you open that up, it's hard to tell what you got. And so a lot of the jig heads come in a small hook or the larger hook. I actually prefer to pour my own. I use the Do It worm nose jig mold, and it's more of like a mushroom style thing. So I don't know if you can kind of see that or not, but this jig head, you can actually pour with a slightly larger hook. So it's not quite as small as the Z-Man small one and not quite as big as the large one. So I use a 1/0 mustad hook, 90-degree jig head. The little lead keeper holds the baits just a little bit better. I love that. As far as weights, what weights do I use? Now there's Z-Man makes all the way up to like 1/5, which is just a hair under a quarter, all the way down to like 1/10 or something like that. I prefer 1/8. That's my standard size go-to. Sometimes I go up to 3/16 or a 1/4 ounce actually when it's really, really windy or I'm dragging in a little bit deeper water and things like that. For the most part though, I'm using 1/8 ounce. All right, so let's talk about the really fun stuff, and that's the baits. Who doesn't like to have more baits, want more baits? The standards, it's the Z-Man Finesse TRD. I prefer the smaller size bait just because I think it's just a little bit tighter profile, especially with that small jig head. But the colors I like for the Z-Man, obviously green pumpkin with purple and gold flake. Also Canada Craw, a little bit of reddish yellow orange color. Really great bait. Also Roboworm. So anyone that knows me knows I love Roboworms, 4.5 and 6-inch straight tails. I've got about a zillion of them. It is probably one of my favorite plastics of all time. But when they announced that they're going to bring out a Ned Worm, I couldn't wait to get my hands on them. So here they are. Here's the cool thing. As much as I'm excited about the actual Ned Worm, I'm excited that they come in a plastic baggie that you can open and you can reclose. It definitely beats the good old baggies like this that are out there. Great move by Roboworm. And here's the deal. You can pick these up, Tackle Warehouse, things like that, for $3-4 a pack. You can't beat the quality. Just great baits. So that said, those are some of the standards that are out there. Some of the ones that maybe people don't use as often or don't even know that are out there, but are equally as good. Case Plastics, they're Lil'Magic sticks. It's basically like a 3-inch Cinco. You can kind of see on the back. Perfect little baits for Ned rigging. Also, I've got an old bag of them, but I still use them a lot, especially with the Ned Rig craze going on, is the Jax worm. So you can kind of see on that, it's got a little bit more of like a tapered tail rather than like a kind of stick worm look. And the thing I love about this is got a little bit more action. It's a different take, a different look than your standard Ned Rig. And that's going to be really key when the Ned Rig starts to get really popular here. Just like any other bait fish are going to get conditioned to it. It'll still catch fish, but some of these alternatives will help you find and tap into some of those fish. The other is one, I don't know if you can see this or not, maybe you can guess what that is. This is a Lake Fork baby ring fry. Now this is something that's been out for a long time, and I'll be honest, this is kind of a secret keeper bait. I have a bunch of ring fries. In Minnesota, it was a huge technique there. They would use the jig worm basically with the standard one. Great technique. You can tell just from the way it moves. I mean, just look at how that thing moves. I can't, it flops like crazy. It's got a ton of action. Whereas, you get more of kind of the Roboworm and the Z-Man. It's real subtle. It just kind of flops. It moves a little bit. But that ringworm, I mean, it's just got tons of action. Equally as finesse, but a great bait. All right, so we've talked about baits. We've talked about the jig head. The next part is talking about rigging your bait. So you take your jig head, you take your bait, and you want to make sure you line those up. So just like with anything, you want to get them, dead on. You don't want it curled up, kinked up, turning sideways, because it's going to start to roll on your line and things like that. So you want to make sure you kind of line them up. For most of these baits, the hook's supposed to come out right before the egg sac bump on the bait. And so you line it up. You want to come out the top. That's the one thing I love about the Roboworm. You know exactly where the top is. You're not going to run into a situation like with the Z-Man where do you rig it on the bumps or do you rig it on the stripes? It's the ultimate question. So when you get that, you want to make sure that it gets on there super straight. That's the key to this bait. It comes right out the middle of the bait. And something else that I do, and a lot of guys do this, of course I don't have it here right here, is you take a little bit of super glue. I prefer the gel. You put a little bit of super glue right in there, and then you cinch that right up on the head, and that's going to keep that bait right up on there, real tight, and there you have it, Ned Rig. So we've talked about baits, we've talked about the rigging, we've talked about all the fun stuff, but how do you actually fish the bait? And so a couple of key things here. One, you want a medium action rod, something with a fast tip, not necessarily extra fast, but a fast tip. Something 6'6", 7 foot to make long casts. This is a lightweight lure, so you're going to want to have a spinning rod with a longer, faster action tip so you can make those long casts. The next thing that's really key is I use braid for almost all of my spinning rods, and I use a 6 or 8 pound fluorocarbon leader. And the reason why I do that is because you get the benefits of braid, especially on a long cast, and you also get the benefits of invisibility with the fluorocarbon. And some people say, well, use 10 feet. Some people say shorter. I just take it out 1 arm length distance. Now, they used to call me Albatross in high school just because I've got a big wingspan, but that's about 6.5, 7 foot. And then I use a double uni to tie the 2 lines together, and then tie up my Ned Rig and go fishing. Once you cast it out, though, some of the keys to the presentation are you can either hop it back. Now this is a lightweight finesse technique, so that's going to take you a long time. Personally, I just cast it out and reel very slowly, just kind of like a swim bait almost. Whether it's on the bottom or right above the bottom, it looks like a little crayfish just kind of scooting along. With that light weight, it's just going to flutter along. It's not going to dig down in the grass. It's not going to hop. Sometimes people like to hop it like a jig or things like that. I think this just gives a different presentation, and I've caught a ton of fish fishing it that way. So that's the Ned Rig. I hope it puts more fish in your boat. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you do, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see you back. Be watching for more videos just like this, and until then, work to fish. Over and out.